looks great. One of the things that happened when vaccine injuries first started being discussed, particularly myocarditis, there was a lot of confusion because particularly I was confused because I was told by multiple sources, including very credible people, that there was a high risk, particularly with young men, of myocarditis because of the vaccine. Then all this data came out that said there's actually more myocarditis from COVID than there is of the vaccine. What's the real story there?
The real story is that during the first year of the pandemic, Joe, and in fact, Israel looked at this, a few million people, they published a paper, which again I referenced as well, which is the best available evidence, is there was no significant increase in myocarditis from the virus compared to other viruses.
So why did they say there was, and what was the data that they used?
Yeah, I think there was an overdiagnosis of myocarditis. So one of the papers that was published in Nature, and I know this because I know some of the authors, and I know somebody close to one of the authors, and I don't think they did this deliberately. I think they were fed into this perception that they needed to highlight the harms of COVID and it was affecting the heart, is that they weren't strict with their criteria of what myocarditis is. So for example, one of the markers of inflammation of the heart muscle is something called troponin. Troponin also goes up when you have a heart attack. It's used to diagnose a heart attack, but you don't use a single marker on its own to make a diagnosis. It's what's a history, what are other tests showing, what is the likely diagnosis. If you are, and this is something I've come across throughout my whole career, if you have any infection in the body or you're under stress, you have pneumonia, it's quite common that your troponin, which is a marker of inflammation of the heart, which doesn't necessarily mean myocarditis, by the way, will go up. What they did was, if you're in intensive care, in this study, the way that they overdiagnosed, they basically just used people's troponin to make a diagnosis of myocarditis rather than actually, is this truly myocarditis? So there was a massive overdiagnosis of myocarditis that wasn't myocarditis, and that inflated the numbers. When people have looked clinically at the criteria of what myocarditis is with use of MRI scans and echoes and all that kind of stuff, and the history, it doesn't show any significant increase compared to other viruses. And by the way, I have a personal story here. My brother, when I was 11 years old, I lost my older brother. He was 13. And he died because of viral myocarditis. So I know how devastating this can be. I'm not undermining the fact that this can be really devastating. Within a week of having basically a stomach infection, he went into crashing heart failure and died and had a cardiac arrest. So it's something I have an interest in and I know about, and I've managed many people with myocarditis. So there isn't any significant increase. Or if there is, it's minor. When you look at the data on myocarditis after the vaccine, certainly in younger people, under 40, one of the recent publications suggested it probably is even maybe 28 times more frequent. But let's give a caveat here, Joe. I don't want to. It can be in a way comparing apples and oranges. So the vaccine myocarditis in general, what's diagnosed when people are admitted to hospital, doesn't